let's get started because I'm sure people will trickle in, but we also want to give Bradley a little bit more of a time so we can have enough Q&As and be able to discuss not only what's going on and learn more about that, but also what our current concerns have been in this space currently. So with that, I welcome you guys, and I see all familiar faces, so I'm excited to have you guys come in and join us again for this end of month meeting. As you know, we are a space of collaboration when it comes to discussions with higher education and how we can provide knowledge for sufficient access to those who are currently incarcerated and those who have passed in post-incarceration are interested in access to higher education. And that's the purpose of this space. That's the purpose of this coalition, really bringing together the I guess the experts in the area, in the field, if you will, of all things based on higher education for our community at large. And I'm glad to see that we do have some strong partnerships. So I'm glad to see that we have a space that we can all come together and discuss best practices for that. And I don't know that we need breakout rooms at this point because I think we all know each other. And so if anybody wants to talk about anything in particular that they want to start off the bat, if not, I will give space for Bradley to start on his discussion because I also want to give space later on to discuss what our goals are and approach is for this year when it comes to our state level focus. So I want to make sure that we have plenty of space when it comes to that discussion. So if anybody wants to introduce themselves, I think we all know each other here, but if anybody feels that they want to introduce themselves or know a little bit more about each of us, let us know. If not, we'll go on straight to Bradley's discussion today. We're all good? Our chairs here, all good? Marianne, even though you're not a chair at this time, you have been participating consistently and thoroughly. And so I urge you to consider, being that you're always in this field and in this space and very much aware and involved, I urge you to consider being part of, officially being part of one of our chairs. So we can talk about that a little bit later, but just, give some thought to that because you've been a great support for us thus far. So thank you for that. Okay. All right. So if we don't have any, let's see, we don't have any questions. We'll get started then with our guest speaker today. I think the agenda been put on the chat? I think you've all received it as well, but just to let you guys know, I'm super excited to have Bradley Custer with us today. Just a little bit of background on Bradley, aside from his great achievements. He's a higher education policy expert in Washington, D.C. He has worked in federal government, nonprofit research, and public higher education sectors. His research and advocacy focus on supporting system-impacted college students and student loan borrowers. He holds a Ph.D. in higher education from Michigan State University. But in addition to that, I just want to point out that Bradley was one of the originals when it came to Unlock Higher Education and its establishment back in 2019. So Bradley, this is really the work that you guys put together initially for us to continue on. So I hope that we have given good representation and we have furthered this great work that you started with this coalition with some of you, your colleagues and members. But again, the focus is and has been always access to higher education. And given the passing of the Pell Grant, which is something that Bradley was also very involved in with the initial work that Unlock Higher Education did, I want to thank you for pushing that. I also want to let you know that we're looking forward to some next steps, and that's something that I wanted to give space and time later on after your presentation to discuss. And I hope that you can look and see if we're headed in the right direction as to how initially your goals for Unlock Higher Education were established. Bradley, thank you for creating this in some sense. And we look forward to learning more about what is going on today in our space.
Thank you, Judith, and thanks, Beth and Mickey, also for having me back. It's good to see everybody again. It does sort of feel like I went into a hole for a couple years, not being able to attend these types of meetings and really just sort of disengaging from some of that work. I just signed up again so that I'm sort of back on the meeting cadence, and if I can pop in, that's great. Don't know what the future holds. But anyway, we'll get to that part later in the presentation. So Mickey just dropped a link in the chat. That is just a Google Doc with some resources. As I go through my brief remarks today, some of the things that I'll reference are in there. They're not in any particular order, but just have that as a reference for later. I don't have any slides. I'm just going to talk through a little bit of where we've been at Federal Student Aid over the past couple of years, in my office in particular, where we are right now, and what I think perhaps the near future holds, and maybe a little bit about what you all can be doing to help. And then I'm gonna leave lots of time for questions, and we can dig into any of those things, or we can get into the nitty-gritty on student loan stuff, whatever you want to talk about. I'm perfectly happy to get into it. So to start, I joined the Office of Federal Student Aid about 2 years ago in May 2023. And the office that I joined is called the Ombudsman's Office. The Student Loan Ombudsman is responsible for responding to complaints from customers about any aspect of the federal financial aid system. Most of those complaints are about student loans, but people also complain about the FAFSA and other aspects of enrolling in a Title IV program. I was hired specifically to improve customer service to incarcerated student loan borrowers. And that was in large part due to the advocacy from groups like Unlock and others who were speaking directly to the education department about making sure that incarcerated student loan borrowers were not forgotten, and that our programs, our communications were reaching that population. So I came in to make sure that incarcerated student loan borrowers were being helped appropriately when they reached out to the department. But really, the first thing that had to happen was people in prison needed to know that we existed and how to contact our office. So one of the first things we did in September 2023 was published a 2-page fact sheet about Fresh Start. That was just sort of our hook at the time to get some information out there. Fresh Start, if you remember, was a pandemic era temporary initiative that allowed people in default to get out of default more easily than you normally can. It was just sort of a temporary get out of default program. And so we used that opportunity to make a fact sheet tailored specifically for incarcerated student loan borrowers. And we circulated that to facilities across the country, federal, state, and local facilities and tribal facilities. And many thanks to all of you on this call who helped to get that fact sheet circulated. And almost immediately, where that fact sheet got put up on bulletin boards and on prison tablets and put in intake and reentry packets, we started getting letters. And so really, probably for the first time, people in prison had a mailing address for the Office of Federal Student Aid, and they were able to write us a letter. And over the next fiscal year, so from about October 2023 to end of September 2024, we received more than 350 letters from incarcerated people, and I responded personally to every one. So that's something that I'm very proud of. And what were people writing to me about? All kinds of things. Most people were responding directly to what was on the fact sheet, which was about default. A lot of student loan borrowers in prison are in default. And so they were asking to get out of default. They were asking to have their loans forgiven or written off. Many people were just asking, what's the status of my loans? They knew they had loans. They thought they had loans. They don't know. I also helped people who are not in default to get onto an affordable repayment plan. We call those income-driven repayment plans. And for most people in prison who have $0 in income, they can get a monthly payment of $0 per month if they get on that plan. So I helped a lot of people in that, especially that early, the first part of that year, get onto $0 repayment plans, which means they can keep their loans in good standing. Of course, that's important because if you have defaulted loans, you can't get a Pell Grant. So anybody who was trying to enroll in a second chance Pell program or a prison education program, if you have defaulted loans, you had to get out of default first. So a lot of the people who I helped had that explicit goal. But actually, most of the people that I was helping did not have that explicit goal. They were just what I think of as regular student loan borrowers trying to manage their student loans just like everybody else. And they just needed extra help. So the other category of people that I want to make sure to mention is victims of identity theft. A lot of people in prison are identity theft victims. People have stolen their personal information and they use it to their advantage. And one way they do that is they submit college applications using that person's information to colleges, and they submit FAFSAs for that person. Their intent is to get refund checks from the loans and Pell Grants. And then they take the cash, but then that person has student loans in their name that they didn't take out, and they almost always default because obviously people don't know that they have loans and they're not going to pay on loans that aren't there. So anyway, that's another category of people who I would help from prison, people who wrote to me and said, I just got a bill, or my family members are getting bills for this loan. I live in this state. This person says they took out a loan from some college in that state, and that was not me. So anyway, I help people with a process to get relief from those programs. So then between the end of FY24 and the early part of this year, letters were still coming in. And our last push before the change in administration was to get one more fact sheet out the door. So Fresh Start ended, so we needed to update that with some new information. And my partners in the Office of Correctional Education and I put out a one-page flyer that just simply had 2 mailing addresses, and it said, if you have questions about X, you write a letter to this address. If you have questions about Y, you write a letter to this address. Those fact sheets are on the Google Doc that Mickey shared in the chat. And in mid-January, we were able to get that out the door. So it went out on all the listservs. I'm sure you saw it. It got a lot of traction on LinkedIn from a couple people who shared it. And I know just based on the very kind of early signs of letters coming in that fact sheet was posted in more prisons, in more states, and more letters were coming in. And that was, of course, the goal. So where are we now? About 3 weeks ago, hundreds of us in the education department, more like 15 or 1600 total, received an email from our chief human resources officer saying that our entire teams were cut, including my team. So my entire team, which was just one part of the ombudsman office, was cut. Another whole part of the ombudsman office was also cut. Of course, before that, people were put on leave because of so-called DEI reasons. Other people were fired outright because they were what's called probationary employees. That just means that they had only worked at the department for less than a year. Sometimes it was less than 2 years, sort of depended on the person in the position. And then a bunch of people took various incentives to quit. Some people retired, some people retired early, some people took there were a couple different buyout type options. And so where we are today is that the Department of Education as a whole is at about 50% capacity. The Office of Federal Student Aid is, I think, also about 50% capacity, maybe like 60%. I think they fired just a little less of us. You've probably heard in news reports that they protected certain things like the FAFSA and student loan servicing. I don't believe that to be true. There were a lot of people who were fired who touched all of those things. So I put in the resource document a couple org charts. You're welcome to just kind of scroll through those org charts, and you can literally see the people crossed out for the people who were fired or separated. So it's really quite stunning to see the cuts. And I mean, I don't know what half of those offices did, but I know that you can't do everything you did before with half of your department gone. So there's no question in my mind, despite the rhetoric coming from the administration, that we're going to continue to do everything that we used to. And so how does that affect incarcerated student loan borrowers? Obviously, I'm gone. I was helping more than 200 people at the time of my separation. When we got that email, within, I think, hours, we were shut out of all of our systems except for email. So there was no time for final goodbyes or here's what you need to do if XYZ happens. And then for about 2 weeks, we only had access to email, but we couldn't email people externally, which is all of my customers. They obviously are all external. And so there was virtually no transition. We were all just completely cut off. And then as of last week on Monday, I was shut out of, I can't even log into my computer. So we're all done. We've been put on leave. We're paid for a little while longer, and then we're formally terminated. So there are thousands of customers who had reached out to us, incarcerated and not incarcerated, who I don't know what's going to happen to. I don't know if there are people left who can take on all of those customers in addition to all of the new customers that come every single day. But here's my sort of best advice for how an incarcerated customer can get help in the near future. Previously, if a person needed help with their student loans, the best advice always was go to your student loan servicer first. And that is still my best advice here. Most of the people who would write me letters from prison probably could have had their issue resolved if they went directly to their student loan servicer. Now, that's easier said than done. They don't know who their student loan servicers are. They don't know their addresses. So that's a problem that we're going to have to figure out. But the first recommendation is to write a letter to your student loan servicer. So if you're getting bills and you can't afford your payments, you want to get on an income-driven repayment plan. If you are in default, need to get out of default, whatever the issue is, you need to start with your student loan servicer. Obviously, if you're getting bills, you'll know that address and you can send that address. If you don't know the address, that's something that we can sort of circle back to that and figure out a plan forward for that. Anyway, student loan servicers are able to handle most of the problems. And if they can resolve your problem, it's good to start there. The next line of defense normally would be to complain to someone like FSA. So if you have been trying to reach out to your student loan servicer or you don't know your student loan servicer, we have a complaint website where most people on the outside would just go to submit a complaint, or you could write a letter to our office and I would be there to answer those letters. Now that our capacity is so diminished, I actually think the next best option is to write a letter to your member of Congress, particularly your House of Representative member. That is because every member of Congress has a casework team. And when you write a letter to your congressperson about a federal issue, it has to be a federal issue. So your federal student loans, your FAFSA, your Pell Grants, all of that counts. They have full-time professionals whose job it is to respond to constituent problems. And student loans are certainly one of them. What do they do with those complaints? If they can't answer it themselves, which I think is most of the time, I don't think they try to answer everyone's complaints. They send those complaints to the department that it affects. So if you're complaining about, if you're having issues with your Veterans Affairs benefits, if you're having issues with your green card, if you're having issues with your student loans, they send them to the right federal agency to handle them. So where did those complaints go? My office, the Office of the Ombudsman. The reason why I think routing a complaint through the congressional office is better than writing directly to the Ombudsman office is because I believe, if through nothing else, there is at least an assumption of responsibility that the Education Department is responding to members of Congress. I don't know if it's a law exactly, don't really know, but we are supposed to at least be responsive when a member of Congress says, hey, one of my constituents is having a problem. We need you to look into this and give them a response. So I recommend that incarcerated borrowers in prison, if they are not getting responses from their student loan servicer, or that response is not satisfactory, to write a letter to their House of Representative person to get a response. As a third level, then, if they're not getting responses from either of those, the fact sheet that we sent out in September or January has our address on it. That will always be the address of the Education Department. And whether someone is there to open up those letters and respond, I don't know, but that would be sort of my third level suggestion, is to send a letter to that address. I know they are still coming in. I don't know who's opening those letters, and I don't know who's responding to them right now. But that fact sheet is still, it's still out there. The addresses are still correct, and I don't think the Education Department is going anywhere, anytime soon. So that is just sort of some like high level advice for incarcerated customers who need help with their student loans, their FAFSAs, their Pell Grants, anything related to their college experience. Start with the student loan servicer if it's related to student loans, then go to your member of Congress, and then go to try writing a letter directly to the Ombudsman office. So where does that leave us? I, for my part, am still very much fighting for my job. I'm fighting for my team. I'm fighting for the Education Department. I'm fighting for federal workers across the country in all agencies. There is a lot going on. I'll be at the Senate tomorrow talking to senators. There's a nationwide event called Hands Off happening on Saturday. There's a link in my resources document to that. Please find a Hands Off event in your area to attend. Hands off our education, hands off our government, hands off our federal workers, hands off our healthcare, you name it. We need to be out there. Beyond that, as we get into Q&A here, we can certainly talk about what can Unlock be doing in the near term, in the farther term. I'm also happy to talk more about specific student loan related issues. I'm not going to jump into it right now, but the SAVE plan is probably something that you've all heard about. To me, it's the next big student loan thing that's coming that we should be prepared for. So I can talk about that. And anyway, so I'm going to sort of pause there, open up for questions. I, I'm happy to answer any type of question about any topic. So, don't pull any punches. And anyway, thanks for having me.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in. Sorry, Bradley. I was trying to find my raise my hand thing, and I don't know what's going on with my computer. But, and I will only start with 2 questions because, of course, I usually have a laundry list, but we have other people here. My first question is, well, first of all, before I even get there, I just want to say that you have done yeoman's and yeowoman's work for a number of years in terms of working with the incarcerated population and higher education, student loans, pretty much anything in that realm. And I personally just want to say thank you. And your work has never gone unnoticed. And on a side note, I am kind of glad that you're able to at least talk to us again. So my first question is, clearly the current administration is not wanting to fund or pay any notice to anything that remotely is connected to quote unquote DEI. How, if at all, do you think that affects the current community, the current incarcerated community?
I have not heard any statements from any member of this administration about higher education in prison. I can't say if that's unusual or not, this kind of early on to know if it's something that they would support or not support. There's a link in the resource document from Charlotte West's reporting on this. She talked to some folks, I think Ruth's quoted in there. I think we need to just monitor where they stand on this. Obviously, we know the first Trump administration was supportive. He signed the bill and DeVos was kind of weirdly supportive. And so we were like, okay, we're just going to go with that and not like ask too many questions. I don't know where that stands today from a conceptual standpoint. Do they believe in education in prison? I think one thing that we've learned from getting Pell approved and everything else is like it was always hard to find someone who was actually opposed to education in prison. Like that was never, I don't think, exactly the issue. Now maybe paying for it was a little bit more nuanced, but I think what we're facing here is what a lot of people have described as the machete versus the scalpel. Care for sort of what's happening. And so could higher ed in prison be, part of what gets hacked off? I really don't know. But I think we do need to watch for those first statements or indications of how they might support or not support higher ed in prison.
Thank you. You had a whole section there where you just froze completely. So
Sorry, I sort of saw that.
that's okay. I think I knew what you were saying. It was right after the machete versus scalpel approach.
Yeah, right on cue for some
Yeah,
drama. Just
yeah.
to say that I don't know what's going to get hacked off. With that approach, they're not thinking about what's important to us. What do we actually care about? What should we keep? What should we not keep? Whole group things are just getting cut. And that's why you've seen in some reporting, they've had to bring some people back because they were like, whoops, we didn't know what that team actually did. And what they did was actually critical for this and that. I think everything that we do is critical. But anyway, let's keep watching for any public statements more specifically about education in prison.
Thank you. One of my other questions is, and then I'll take a step back. So clearly there's been a lot of angst around FAFSA, meaning there have been some challenges. And when it comes to FAFSA pieces moving forward and excuse me, folks who are currently incarcerated, still being able to kind of fill that out, have access, so on and so forth. When they're running into problems, and this is just a for myself question, were they still able to contact your office? And if so, where would that go? And if they were actually contacting like federal student aid, if they were contacting a different branch, if you will, are there people left there to even assist them, is my question.
My office sometimes handled FAFSA issues, and every once in a while, a higher ed and prison director would email me, or a financial aid director would email me, probably because they sort of knew me in some way. But I still think, as of right now, if any of your students are having difficulties, the best option is still to send an email to pep@ed.gov. I didn't work very often with the Second Chance Pell and Prison Education Program folks. I know some of them have been separated through one pathway or another. I'm not the best person to give you the best update on like who's left, and because the other thing that happened, just for context, sort of between some of the layers of firings and separations, is that federal student aid went through a reorganization. It's just something that happens every once in a while. They decide to move things around, move people around. The name of my office changed a little bit, anyway. So a bunch of things I think got moved around with that anyway. And it's hard to kind of assess, it's hard to compare like before and after everybody got fired, before and after the reorganization. So honestly, I don't know exactly who's left and who's where over there, but would still recommend pep@ed.gov as a first line of defense, saying, my students are having difficulty, they need help. Hopefully someone is there to respond. We had a person in my office who was sort of our FAFSA specialist. She was the person who was on point to respond to FAFSA complaints. She's gone. And I think a couple of the people that was helping her are gone. So again, I would start with pep@ed.gov.
Great, thank you. I'll take a step back. And by the way, thanks for providing that fact sheet. It's very, very helpful.
The fact sheet has been posted on the chat so that you can reference those resources. Marianne, you had a question?
Yes, first of all, Bradley, I'm sorry that your team and you were caught in this transition. So it sounds like you've been very dedicated to serving your customers and to serving the community. So first, I just wanted to thank you and express my sorrow that there's been the change. But given where we are today, and in any, kind of, I personally come from a background where corporate transitions and mergers and firings and all this were very common. So and I know it's, it can be very upsetting and traumatic and has real financial impact to people. So I do recognize that change. But given where, at least from some of the news articles and information I've read, there is and these are usually very theoretical, a theoretical plan to transition to the Small Business Administration. So my question, and perhaps this is an opportunity for us, is I just forwarded to Judith an article that I caught about the Republican congressman, I guess it's from Pennsylvania, who quote unquote said the SBA should be able to handle this. Whether he knows that definitively, it's probably early in the process to tell, but this woman, Kelly Loeffler, was head up. And I'm just curious, candidly, have you connected with her? Could you connect with her? Would you have an opportunity to work with her, to advise her? Or is there any plug in here to get into the planning and perhaps even long-term improvement into the new world, whatever that is, but at least get rather than swimming against it, jump in and see if there's a way to hook in?
I would say engaging with the Small Business Administration right now is a little bit cart before horse. The first thing to know is that the mass firings of everyone in the education department, unlike sort of a run-of-the-mill layoff that might happen in the private sector, is that this is illegal. You know, companies lay off people because their missions change, their funding changes. Congress already funded the education department for our level of employees, and they frankly just cannot fire us all in this way. Similarly, they cannot by law simply pick up the student loan system, $1.7 trillion worth of loans, and move it to another federal agency. Under law, federal student aid as an agency of the education department operates the financial aid system, including student loans. So all of the rhetoric around moving SBA, moving student loans to SBA first needs to be pushed back against, because to answer your question, no, SBA cannot handle this volume of student loans. To be frank, we can barely handle it. And SBA also just fired 40% of their staff.
Right.
So
No, I'm aware of that.
You know, none
Yes,
of
they've
it makes
downsized.
sense. Yeah, none of it
Yeah.
makes sense. So first thing we need to push back against doing that, because Congress needs to make a choice. They have to decide once and for all, are they going to approve the administration's destruction of the education department? Are they going to approve, you know, transferring this, you know, pieces of it? And there are several pieces that are supposed to move. And I think we have to start with that. If at some point we cross the bridge of Congress passing a bill that says the student loan portfolio is going to move to SBA, then we engage with how do we make sure that they do a good job of it. But until then, we need to keep pushing back on this is illegal, they can't do it, despite what they say. We actually need Congress to weigh in. And if Congress doesn't weigh in, that's where the courts are our other chance. There are 4 or 5 pending lawsuits right now challenging various aspects of the education department closing. So I think we have to let those play out as well. And so anyway, my short answer is we need to start with sort of resolving some of these first questions about what can they actually do, what are they actually doing, and then we can engage in a more maybe like technical kind of discussions with whatever we end up with, to make sure that, you know, customers are still being served.
Okay, thank you for your, yeah, for that, you know, information and perspective. And yeah, I mean, you were in the trenches, so I certainly respect your view on that. Thank you, Bradley.
Thanks.
Any
Other questions?
Bradley?
I'm gonna jump in. So you've touched on this a little bit, but just maybe so if we are advising people on a state level what they should advocate within their own legislation systems to bring to the attention of their local representatives, what would be those top topics that we could push as a movement to support and answer questions on a local level?
There are a handful of states that have a student loan ombudsman within their state government. Sometimes they are in the kind of financial regulation office. Sometimes they're in the state attorney general's office. Sometimes they're in the higher education office, but it's someone whose job is to help student loan borrowers in their state. My office used to work very closely with those folks, and they were very good. They were great advocates. They were very knowledgeable. And there are, I think, some pending bills in other states to create a student loan ombudsman. I would encourage Unlock to support those and to continue to push that in other states. To say that at the state level, you know, state residents need a place to go to where they can complain about student loans, about student loan servicers, In most states, student loan servicing companies like Mohila and Nelnet and Maximus have to be licensed in those states. And the student loan ombudsman helps to make sure that those companies are being regulated correctly and that they're treating residents of that state fairly and legally. So in absence of a robust federal student loan ombudsman, and by the way, the CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau's student loan ombudsman, was also fired. A recent court case suggests maybe that she will be reinstated, but this is all just to say, whether on this topic or any other topic, in absence of a federal government doing what they're supposed to protect people, we need the state governments to do that. They need to step up and increase oversight of institutions so that bad quality higher education institutions are I don't know, whatever, stopped from hurting students, and particularly in the student loan space, that there is someone to call in your state government if you're having problems with the federal student loan.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And again, I second what everybody else here has said about your work and dedication to this field, and let us know if there's anything on an individual level that we can do to help support that.
Thank you. And to answer your question, I'm pretty sure if you Google like state student loan ombudsman, someone did a report or a news story or something that has the list. So I think you'll be able to find that. And you might also be able to find some pending legislation in the states where they've tried to get a student loan ombudsman up and running.
Thanks.
Bradley, I have a follow-up just from a timeline. If you could give us what do you see in terms of days, months for the congressional process to either take hold, or some transition, and how does that affect the difference between Pell Grant awards for FAFSA versus loan servicing issues? Because I see those as two. One is funding and one is collection. So just your best view of kind of the timeline and structure of how you see that could go.
Yeah, I think you're right on that, right now we're sort of like mid-cycle in a semester as far as like lots of people aren't submitting FAFSAs right this moment, and aid is being dispersed to students and colleges. So like there's probably not immediate disruption for students in college right now. But if this is not all resolved by the fall and we have another disastrous FAFSA cycle, I don't know. Whereas in the student loan space, the student loan servicers are funded separately. So like, again, they should also continue kind of operating as normal. Where I think things are going to start to go south is when we get the SAVE plan decision from the court. So the SAVE plan was an income-driven repayment plan that's been gummed up in court since the summer. Whatever that decision is going to require a massive response from federal student aid. We've got to provide instructions to the servicers. The servicers have to know what to do. Anyway, to answer your question, Congress is moving slowly on all of this. They haven't quite like captured the breadth of all of the things that are happening, and Republicans control both houses of Congress. So they're not going to be quick to defend against things like closing the department, but I also don't know how quick they're going to be proactive in passing the bill to eliminate the education department. It's really hard for me to say what's going on there. And every day we get some new news, a new executive order about some agency or some group of federal employees being fired. So I think we're going to be drinking from the fire hose for quite a long time. But I don't think it's going to be long before in the education world we start seeing the impacts of half our people being gone.
I have one follow-up question. So in light that we're going to see this push, not just in the prison education sphere, but also in FAFSA overall, how do you have any advice or any thoughts on how best to make sure that as all sectors in education feel this pressure, that we can make sure that we're protecting those people who are in the in this sphere, and not just once again becoming like secondary students, and as this pressure comes through, just making sure that we shore up our people.
We have to make sure that members of Congress in particular understand the impact of firing this many people, closing whole teams. Right now, again, because imagine just being, not that I am an apologist for our elected officials, because I'm not by any stretch of the imagination, but imagine any member of Congress trying to understand every aspect of our government. I couldn't even tell you what half of the office in federal student aid do, because it's all so complicated. Any sort of random member of Congress that you get in front of does not know anything about it either. There are only a handful of people who know a lot about student loans or know about the FAFSA. That means that through our stories, through our experience, we have to explain to them, here is the impact of cutting this part of the education department or this team or this function. Here's how it impacts students in our programs. Here is how that is, here's how that's bad. Here's how that goes against the values that you have as a member. You support education, you support this and that. Did you know that cutting this team is going to result in this negative outcome? Again, to go back to the kind of machete versus scalpel metaphor, just huge chunks of the government are being shut down without any concern for what the impact is going to be, whether it's sort of direct or whether it's like trickle down. And that's where I think there's a lot of, we've started analyzing like what's the direct impact of some of these cuts, but then there's what we don't yet know is sort of the trickle down. And that's what I think our advocacy has to be centered. So going to supportive members, saying you've always been an ally of higher education, of higher education in prison, whatever. But here's how all of that is threatened by the actions of the administration, and here's why we need Congress to act. We have to connect the dots for them. That's probably the best way that I could describe it.
Bradley, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. And I started to think of you about 3 weeks ago and reached out to a colleague and said, wait, where's Bradley right now? And here you are 3 weeks later, giving us this incredible view. Your work has been extraordinary over the years. Really grateful to you for that. I came onto the call a little bit late. I also know that you were focused on loans primarily with an organization in Washington State, the Evergreen State College. We applied to be Pell approved or what have you early last summer, and began to worry more and more as time went on, and still have heard nothing. I wonder whether you have any insight into that side of the shop, that this is to be an approved higher ed program in prison. So I'm sure that team received some severe cuts as well. But I wonder whether you have any insights into their process and what was taking so long in the first place.
Yeah, I wish I could give you a little bit more information there. I didn't work closely with that team, especially over the last 6 or 8 months. There may be others on this call who have a better sense of who is left and what the approval process is going to be like. To my knowledge, nobody was fired from those areas, but there were at least a couple people who took various separations. I mean, the big one being Melanie Story, who was the head of the policy area in federal student aid. She's now the CEO of NASFA. So she was sort of the head leader over the team that dealt with those kinds of the policy teams. And then Michael Cagle, who was someone who, if you ever emailed pep@ed.gov, might have been the person responding. He was also someone who took one of the leave options. So anyway, honestly, I don't know who's left, and if the responsibility has shifted to a different office. Again, some of the names of the offices changed over the last couple of months. So It's a good question to follow up with folks, with others who might know. And again, I put a link in the resource document from Charlotte West's article. She covers that a little bit and tries to get into kind of what's going on. There's still a lot to understand. And one of the, I think, sort of another trickle down kind of thing is that people are still shifting around. As these units are figuring out who's left, what do we need to do, people are going to continue to be moved. So nothing is like stable right now. I also personally think that more firings are coming. I think they are going to fire a lot more people, particularly people involved in policy decisions. That's called Schedule F. If you haven't read up on Schedule F, read over that. I think that's the next round of firings coming for the education department. They're doing this in waves. So anyway, nothing is sort of settled yet, and we just have to keep watching where this is all headed.
Hi, this is Ruth from Vera, and we're paying a lot of attention to whether the prison education programs are still going through and getting approved. And like Bradley said, like so much is in flux. But in our most recent conversations with Department of Ed, including with Ashley Schuler, who Jay was just asking about in the chat, they are still accepting PEP applications. I believe, I know that they are still processing them. I think because of changes, like the part of Ed that was handling some of that is the school participation division in terms of processing new applications that came in. And I believe they did get some substantial cuts in the last round. And so they are reformulating how they will kind of like manage that workflow. But the message that they wanted to get out to the field was like the door is open, please keep submitting. They definitely intend to transition the Second Chance Pell schools over into prison education programs and to accept new applications. But I don't know at the moment, given especially just staff cuts and capacity, what the timeline will be like.
Thanks, Ruth.
And you can still email that same address, pep@ed.gov, if you wanted to check on the status of your application.
And I think that just speaks to another longstanding advocacy piece, which is that it's one thing to get our policy goals through, whether it's approving Pell programs or whatever. It's another thing to have a properly staffed agency that can actually do the work. And this is something that even before all the cuts was a major talking point, and you can find research from the think tanks and research organizations in DC that really talk about properly funding federal student aid so that we can do the work. Well, all of that's, I mean, if we needed more in the before times, imagine what we need now. I mean, it's really hard to kind of assess what can we even hope to accomplish with this level of staffing and funding. So that's another drum that we've got to beat, is getting FSA, the resources and staffing recovered to continue this critical work. And that starts with rehiring fired federal workers and getting back on track.
Hey, thank you for that. I got a question for you, Ruth. I'm sitting there thinking about the second chance Pell sites that everybody has to be PEP by the 2026. How does this likely change those schools, being that it was already a slow process now, and we these new barriers may even add to that backlog? What would happen to schools? Just say, for example, 10 schools didn't get notification that they have been PEP approved before 2026, and they still have students that are receiving Pell Grants, a part of that summer cohort, just say, for example.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jay. So just the timing for the Second Chance Pell transition was supposed to happen over 3 years with 3 different dates that the colleges had to hit to accomplish different parts of their overall kind of process through becoming a PEP. So last year they had to get approval from their corrections agency. This year by June 30th, they have to get their approval from their accreditation agency. And then they have to submit, the third and final milestone is that they have to submit their Department of Ed application by January 1st of 2026. So instead of an additional calendar year, it's just 6 months to get to this last application date. So at the moment, I don't, my understanding is that the Department of Ed is still intending to get those done so that, like, process those applications so that there would be no break in the eligibility of incarcerated students. They'd transition smoothly over from second chance Pell eligibility into becoming just a regular PEP. But so I don't think I can say yet exactly what might happen, but I think we all have some of those capacity concerns around, like, how will this be going? Will there be enough people? Because we're talking about 150 colleges that will be coming through at the same time, some with many programs that they're offering in prison. So there's a lot of paperwork to potentially look at. The recommendation that our contacts at Ed have offered is to get your paperwork in as soon as possible. So if you don't have to hit the milestone for the accreditors until June 30th, but if you can start working on that Ed application sooner rather than later, get moving so that they have a little bit more lead time and there's just more runway for that transition time.
Thank you for that. And I apologize that we have gone over our meeting, but it's been some phenomenal information that we have received. So I appreciate you, Bradley, for sticking with us and giving us all these resources and feedback as to how we should approach. And I just want to mention, I know we're 5 minutes over, but I want to briefly mention real quick and give a great segue as to how you mentioned that we should be focusing at the state level. I want to assure you guys that this is the focus that we're also taking. And I'd like to introduce Elizabeth, and perhaps Elizabeth, you can just give us a little bit quick synopsis of what our goals are and how we're reaching out now to start focusing on our state level work.
Sure. Thanks, Judith. So we have decided that the federal and state subcommittees for Unlock Higher Ed are going to continue to be together. The federal area is chaos, as we all know, and therefore we think it's really important that we get a national network together of advocates that are advocating for higher education and prison systems locally. So we have decided to put out a call that should be coming out this week sometime, as long as it can get through steering committee, to our fellow advocates and people who work in this field across the nation. And then we will be the point of contact to support and also translate what's happening from state to state at our local levels to make sure that if the federal system completely fails, or how we can support on a local level, pushing back against what's happening on the federal level. Advocates in each area. To that end, we are putting out a call for 1 to 3 representatives that are working in each state to join our committee. We wanted to call it Congress. We can't call it Congress. Higher Ed and Prison Congress, but we're going to call it a Education and Workforce Advocacy Committee. And that call should be coming out this week for people across the country, and we can be a point of reference to connect what's happening in each location, and then also to make sure that we have a unified messaging across the nation going forward. So we're really excited about this new initiative. We think it's really important to offer a space not only for our membership to come and vent, but also to get good information and to find ways forward. We're really big about being solution-minded and what's the next step to make sure that our students are safe and heard in all of the ensuing chaos. If there's any questions about that, I can take them briefly, but there will be more information coming out the next week or so about this, and we will be presenting at NSHEP about this specifically during our panel. So
Elizabeth, one quick question, and that is for those of us who've been attending either state or federal meetings over the last couple of years, which time frame are we actually using for meetings? Because they were two different time frames.
Judith,
I'll take that. We haven't decided on that yet. We'll probably be having a new polls regarding, you know, the best time available for the group as it forms. But I want to let Bradley know that you've given us some great points, starting points when it comes to our reaching out and looking for individuals that would be committed to this. So we're going to be reaching out to the student loan bugs band at the state level and start from there and see how we can get their support and get, you know, individuals that are in the field that are working in this space and having those conversations so that we can, as a coalition, you know, have a space to come together and discuss what practices or what are happening in each of our state and see how we can support each other. Again, you mentioned, you know, going to our state reps as well to try to push for that. So it's in lines, Bradley, with what you have suggested. So I'm happy to see that many are in this kind of mind frame that we need to start pushing for our state level, you know, representation at this point. And with that, any other questions? I want to
Thank you, Bradley.
Oh, yeah, I want to thank everybody for staying on. And Bradley, thank you so much for all the resources that you provided. I think they've been placed on the chat. Please, guys, look at it. It has some wonderful information on there and certainly information that we need to follow up and follow through. This is hard work. This is long vetted work, but this is such wonderful, you know, satisfying work when we really see the results that we are able to support our student committee. Thank you.